All right, we'll go ahead and get this thing going. Thanks everybody for joining us today. You're here with SalesIntel and SalesRoads, and we're presenting on the Inside Scoop trade shows in 2021. Reliable lead gen channel or not? Obviously, this is one that has a very important question for a lot of people, especially anybody that's done trade shows or in-person events in the past as a primary lead gen channel. As a lot of that stuff has obviously changed pretty significantly, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over this year and the upcoming years. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll while we do introductions. So please go ahead and drop your answer there on the poll, and we'll get a sense of what people's plans are for in-person events this year. All right, while we wait on that, my name is Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Partnerships and Alliances over here at SalesIntel. And we have David Kreiger, who's President and Founder of SalesRoads here with us. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here, Jason.
Cool. All right, looks like we've got most of everybody that's voted. I'll give just one more second for anybody that's not gotten an answer in, and we'll close up the poll here and share the results. So. All right, we'll go ahead and share those with everybody. All right, so it looks like the majority are planning Q3 or Q4, more into 2022 or later. Very few are planning on Q1 or Q2. I think that's not particularly surprising, both from the standpoint of people not wanting to do it, as well as just general availability of these. Of course, most of these have been canceled as far as in-person events. I know for us over here at SalesIntel, we had a half dozen in-person events that we had already planned for, booked flights, booked hotel reservations, had our booth materials, everything ready to go right when COVID hit. In fact, the week before COVID hit and everything started getting canceled, we had 2 different events that we were running simultaneously. So when you talk about people that were affected by all of this, we are a great case study of that. So go ahead and let you, David, talk through a little bit about the study that you guys conducted here.
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we just heard a lot from our clients and new clients who were talking about how trade shows was just a really important part of their lead generation process. And obviously, as all of us experienced, and you just mentioned, Jason, 2020, that just dried up overnight for some folks. I remember one client who that was like their only way of generating leads up until that point. And so it was just, something that was, we've never seen before. And so at SalesRoads, we really just wanted to dive into that a little bit and kind of understand first, do a little bit of a postmortem, what happened last year and how were people able to pivot given that circumstance, and then try to get a little window into 2021 and see, what are people anticipating so that we all can plan accordingly. So we talked to over 100 sales and marketing executives in December, so the end of this year, across all different industries, but they all had to have attended a trade show in 2019. So we wanted people who were really, part of the trade show community that was a channel for them. And really, we just wanted to answer three main questions. When are trade shows coming back? Do people feel like they can count on them for lead gen? And understand how successful firms in 2020 were able to navigate this so that people can replicate that in 2021.
Right. So let's start off. What was the scope of the project here? So you hit on a little bit of this, but let's go ahead and walk through this.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the things we sort of uncovered too as part of just the research, which seems reasonable, but we didn't even realize it coming in, is that trade shows are the second largest source of B2B revenue in the United States. So that wasn't data we gathered, that was from PricewaterhouseCoopers. So just shows you the magnitude of the impact on our industry when the second largest source of revenue just dries up overnight. And so, what we found, just in the first set of results is somewhat similar to the folks who are on here, is that, and maybe the folks we talked to are a little bit more optimistic. Actually things have changed pretty, even with the vaccine, this is a fluid environment, right? As to, when things are going to happen and when people are going to go back. So of the people that we talked to, some in about one quarter in December were ready to go back, actually. And so we were a little surprised, that how quickly people wanted to go back in Q1, 20%, Q2, 23%. So that's kind of like when do they feel comfortable? Now, I think partly the way we ask the question here is, when do they anticipate going back? And it's slightly a different question. And I think probably what was said here is probably more indicative of when things might go back. But I think two things were interesting here. One is there's pent-up demand. I think people do want to go back. They are hungry to go back to trade shows, both from a lead gen, but probably from a social standpoint. But the reality is that it's just not going to be back to normal in 2021. I think we all know that, but you see it from the data here. I mean, at the best case scenario, 1/3 of people are not comfortable going back until Q3 of this year. So the trade shows, for most of our year, we just can't rely on them for predictable lead gen at this point.
And then, yeah, I mean, the next one is particularly interesting to me is, what does that look like from a budget standpoint?
Yeah. So, here's the other part of that is that, oh, go ahead, Jason.
No, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, of the people we talked to, only 41%, once they're ready to go back, once it's already clear, they got the all clear and they're ready to go back, only 41% are going to restore their budgets back to 2019 level. So that's pretty significant, both for the industry, right? That they're losing out 59% of revenue being invested in this channel. But also, I think, and we'll get into this, is 2020 was a time for experimentation, and some folks found some new channels too, and other ways to maneuver because they had to. But yeah, only 41% as of right now from our survey are planning to reinvest in trade shows the way they were in 2019.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that's really important, and anybody that's read any of the research and analysis knows that that extends beyond just trade shows. I mean, there was so much experimentation that went on last year just out of necessity, and so one of the big other big trends that people have seen is that digital advertising, in particular social media advertising, is anticipated to take a very long-term significant hit, because a lot of people, a lot of organizations really dialed back that ad spend and realized how much of that ad spend was being done indiscriminately or without great value. And so, whenever you do that and you take adjustments and you experiment, you say like, hey, we cut our ad spend in half, or hey, we're no longer spending all of this money on events, but we managed to find other lead gen channels that have managed to keep us going. And maybe a more efficient channel than some of these other things, then yeah, you're inevitably going to see a lot of this stuff play out. I know for us at SalesIntel in the data space, we've seen a lot of that as well, because that has been one of the things people have turned to as an additional or as a backfill lead gen channel, which is hey, we're not going to all of these events and getting all of these lists of attendees and stuff like that. So we've got to have some way to feed the sales and marketing engine. So we've seen a lot more people that may have never considered, a data partner as an essential piece of their tech stack coming in and having those conversations. So I think you're going to see a lot of these types of shifts across the board.
Yeah, and so in just the, as we move into to this too, I think it will be an interesting question with those three things, where are people just going to use other channels moving forward? And then, is there, counteracting that, is there pent-up demand for trade shows? And then lastly, there's a network effect, right? So if people start not going back to trade shows, will it be a self-fulfilling prophecy? And so it remains to be seen, but there are a few powerful dynamics that are at play to see how quickly and how, trade shows recover going into the end of 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, and I think this slide in particular is one of the most eye-opening ones for me. So why don't you talk through the results you found here?
Yeah, so this, basically this is looking at last year and how companies, reallocated their budget and how that impacted and correlated to a positive impact or a negative impact in their lead generation activities. And what we found is that businesses who reallocated 50% or more of their trade show budget were 17 times as likely to report positive revenue impacts. And if the other part of that is, if you look at the left part of that slide of people who allocated less than 50%, it was almost as if just don't do it, right? Because it was either like 1% had positive, or it was no impact or negative impact. And so, I think the learning here is for folks going to 2021 is that, first of all, it's tough to if you are relying on trade shows, right, and you have to create new channels, it's not easy, right? And so those folks who in 2020 who said, okay, I've lost trade shows, I'm gonna dip my toe in the water here, peel back some budget, I'm gonna do a little bit here, a little bit there, they had no success, right? But those folks who really invested, some still did, because it's still hard, but those who really did find success were those who invested. And I think it's the focus and investment and really saying, listen, I've got to make this work. I've got to replace trade shows, and we're all in. It's not like we're just going to save money here and scale back. We're going to be aggressive, and we're going to put our chips on the table, and we're going to find ways to make it work. And so people are going to 2021 and realizing if trade shows was a big part of their pipeline, it's not coming back at the earliest till halfway through the year, probably later. And if you want to replace pipeline, you've got to make a commitment to it, and you got to go all in and really make it happen for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm reminded of the conversation I had with you guys as you were conducting the survey. With us as somebody who's had to make choices on where to allocate and stuff like that. We talked specifically about, what about virtual events? And one of the big things that I brought up with you guys as we talked about that was how fundamentally different it is to maximize your ROI and the effectiveness of virtual events versus in-person events. With in-person events, typically it's going to be lower volume, but much more highly qualified interactions and leads you're going to generate from it. Virtual events tends to be much higher volume, but not necessarily as qualified. And so you've got to do a lot more work in post-event follow-up and qualification with virtual events than you do with in-person events. And so strategically, tech stack-wise, process-wise, all of that, it's a very different beast, even though they're both, quote unquote, events. And so it really speaks to what you're talking about. Like, if you're going to make those changes, you've got to think about it holistically, and you've got to really commit to it and do all of those things. I mean, it may require beefing up your SDR team. It may include adding some additional tech. It certainly can involve, some additional processes for follow-up and stuff like that. And whether it's virtual events versus in person, whether it's an investment in a data platform, whether it's investment in more ads, partnerships, whatever that may be, there's implications just beyond just allocation of resources and budget.
Absolutely, well said. And these are tough. It's difficult to do, right?
Yep. So cool. Talk through some of the good news that you guys saw.
Yeah, so I think that folks, in all the channels that were named, people found success in all of them. So that's the good news, right? You can make virtual conferences work. You can make in-house or outsourced marketing work. You can make in-house SDR lead generation or outsourced lead generation work. So that is the good news. If you focus on it and you figure out which channel works for you, there is pipeline beyond trade shows. What was also interesting though is that the highest there was sort of a correlation between those who had a lot of success, and in that same channel there was more not successfuls at all, which was kind of interesting. So virtual conferences, which I think it was about 93% of the respondents had tried at least virtual conferences. It actually had the most number of people say it was very successful, but it also had the largest number of people say it wasn't successful at all. So I think it goes back to that theme and what you were just talking about too, Jason. Is you gotta put in the process. There's not a silver bullet in any of these, and you gotta work each of these channels. And then, the other part, was with, outsourced marketing and outsourced appointment setting. Both of those had the second best very successful rate, but also the highest not successful rate. And I think probably that's, partly due to the fact that not all vendors are alike, right? You can choose really good vendors who are going to just revolutionize that channel, and those that are just not going to move the needle at all. So that was some of the stuff that we found pretty interesting here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you from my own experience. I mean, you have to be extremely careful about who you choose to partner with when it comes to outsourced SDR, outsourced marketing efforts, because oftentimes there's a lot of difficulty in alignment of incentives. So let's take outsourced SDR firms. Most of them will have some sort of a model where they're compensated or their success is determined based off of the number of meetings they have set for you. So they're trying to set as many meetings as possible, which means that they may not have as much attention or focus on qualification and fit as you would like. And so I've seen way too many times, including ones that I've worked with, where that misalignment of incentives means that you're winding up creating more noise than really benefit. And so you've got to make sure that your incentives are in line and that you're working with an organization that really gets what you're trying to do and is able to actually be able to speak to your value, so that they can actually set those qualified meetings or do that, really good high quality marketing. So yeah, none of that's surprising to me, because that is absolutely, something that's hard to get right. Cool. So yeah, what are some lessons here on, people that are trying to figure out how to navigate this? What are some secrets you guys have seen as far as how to maximize success out of this?
Yeah, so this was also interesting, and the data was, you'll see a real linear correlation here to number of channels. So in blue is basically what percentage of respondents had a positive impact on their revenue by reallocating budget to a new channel. So what we saw is that, for instance, if you didn't, it basically goes all the way up, 6.3%, 15, 22 to 31%. And those who had 3 or more channels had basically, 5 times as likely to say that they had a positive impact in reallocating their budget. So that's that they actually did better in 2020 with their new channels than they did with the old channel of trade shows. And we equalize for budget and reallocation there. And I think what that means is, a few things. One is, not all channels are equal, and sometimes you need a little bit of experimentation too, right? So those folks who could try a few different channels and see what worked had a much higher likelihood of actually, making it happen again. And so it goes back to the theme of, it's really tough. If trade shows was your channel and was the way that you were generating most of your pipeline before, it's tough to just dip your toe in the water with one channel, with just not really focusing on it. You've got to really go in and try to make it work, because it's just not easy. Not only do you have to spend the time to make that channel work, but you got to make sure it's the right channel for your business, and it's where your buyers are gonna you can speak to them in the most efficient way.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I mean, especially when you're trying to figure out new channels, new strategies, stuff like that. Yeah, big firm believer in experimentation, because more often than not, you're not going to get lucky and just hit on that ideal thing out the gate. It's going to take some trial and error. The other piece that I would imagine plays a role in this, though, is it's the same thing that you see played out in study after study when it comes to outbound sales and marketing tactics. The more channels that you leverage, and especially if you leverage them in a strategic overlapping fashion, the more effective each one of those channels are. So, I mean, common stat out there, if you add 3 additional channels to your outreach, you typically see a 4x increase in engagement and conversions. And that's even if there's a specific channel that people typically come in or engage off of. Even if they're not particularly, you're not setting appointments off of like LinkedIn messaging, or you're not setting appointments off of, your ABM ads driving people to fill out a form. It doesn't mean that those are not having an impact. It doesn't mean that people are, that those aren't part of the reason why people are more likely to pick up the phone or talk to you whenever they do, or reply to an email, or whatever that channel is. And so, having a multi-channel approach to what you're doing, whether it's sales or marketing, probably plays a role in this, in addition to just the experimentation involved in trying to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely, great point.
All right. So yeah, let's take a few minutes here and bring all of these lessons together. Make sure we've got a few minutes here at the end for Q&A. And speaking of, as you guys have questions for us, please go ahead and drop those in the Zoom side panel, and we'll make sure we've got a few minutes here to tackle all of those. But what were your primary takeaways here off of this? As far as how do you bring this together? What do you do with all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to, acknowledge the reality that 2021 is still not going to be the year of the trade show, right? And you got to anticipate almost not getting any leads from trade shows in 2021. And you got to start, if you haven't started making, decisions as to what channels and how you want to attack and how you want to place your pipeline. Now you got to get going because, like we said, it's not easy. It's not easy to develop a new channel, and it takes budget, right? You've got to really put a stake in the sand and say, listen, I'm going to do it. I'm going to allocate enough budget to it. I'm going to allocate enough time to really make these channels work. And then the more channels you try, the higher your likelihood of success is, both from a testing standpoint, but then to your point, which is great point, Jason, is it's a virtuous cycle, right? They complement each other, and they make each of the channels are stronger because of the other channels that they're operating within. So, the worst thing is, last year was obviously, tough, and sometimes people were trying to save budget and whatnot. But I think what we're seeing, especially with the vaccines coming online and the pent up demand, just even trade show, but elsewhere, that there's a very good likelihood of a good, a lot of business out there to be had in 2021. But we do need to make sure that we've got a strategy in place to go out and get it.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really important there that we hadn't covered already, which is, as you do these experimentations, as you're testing out, additional channels and stuff like that, not only, do a commitment as far as, budget, but give it a chance to actually work. I see way too many times in a long career in marketing where people give something a minimal shot, and then if it doesn't immediately work and move the needle, then oh, that doesn't work. We're gonna move on to something else. Like that's never gonna work. Where what they really needed was some time and effort put behind it, because a lot of these things aren't one initial effort, one initial campaign are not going to click always, and it's a cumulative effect over time of multiple campaigns, multiple efforts, enough time involved there. And so one of the quickest ways you can guarantee that it's not going to work is by not giving it the time that it needs. And so, one thing that I strongly encourage, in particular when I used to run my growth marketing agency, is let's agree before we begin this effort how long of a window we're going to give it, so that whenever those initial results come in, if they are disappointing, you can go back to it and say, like, no, we agreed, we're going to give it this long. We're going to have whatever our metrics are as far as what we're going to have as a minimal commitment. And we're not going to let ourselves get discouraged yet, because that is one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is, it doesn't give them the immediate results that they want. So they throw up their hands like, nope, that one didn't work. We're going to move on. Cool. All right. So 3 quick questions to ask yourself. So do I have a very successful channel I can double down on? This goes back to the experimentation piece that you guys were talking about. Mm-hmm. Are there any new channels I can activate? And again, really back to the experimentation piece. And then, can you do it internally, or do you need outside help? And I think the third one really kind of speaks to the thing we were talking about earlier, as far as these different channels are going to require different processes, different tech, different expertise to be able to execute and maximize on. And sometimes that means, if you're honest with yourself, you don't have that in-house. Just because you don't have it in-house right now doesn't mean that you can't, build that out. But it's also a great way and a great opportunity to leverage the expertise of somebody else to help get that kick-started and accelerated. In the meantime, you can learn lessons from them and build out what you need internally. Any other questions or takeaways out of that one?
Yeah, no, I mean, just to build on that last one, I think that for folks who just felt like, I'm just going to turn on some AdWords, or I'm just going to hire one SDR and bring them in and just have them go try to make it happen, it's just not going to work, right? So it goes back to that slide where if you reinvested less than 50% of your budget, basically just keep 100% of your budget and just don't do it, right? Because it is a process, for SDR, you've got to coach them, you got to train them, you've got to build approaches, build cadence. It's a lot of work. You can't just throw something out there and hope it'll work. Otherwise, just don't do it. So, I think really the big thing is, trying to create a strategy, thinking about these channels, and then do I have the time and the people in place to activate a marketing campaign, to activate, an SDR campaign, to do virtual trade shows in the right way. Otherwise, there's great partners out there that really know how to do this type of thing and can do it more quickly and effectively for you.
Cool. All right, well, it looks like we've got several questions already coming through. Again, pop these in here as you have them for us, and we'll get through these. Patrick is asking, are there any features for virtual trade shows that were more effective? Scheduled webinars, sponsoring talks, simple vendor lists. The options are all over the place, and it's hard to tell what options are available for virtual conferences. I can take the lead on that one, as since we've done quite a few of these virtual events. And first off, Patrick, you're absolutely right. They are all over the place, because the other thing we didn't really hit on is, while we're trying to figure out how to leverage these other channels and stuff like that, most of the people putting on the virtual events are trying to transition from in-person events. And so you're seeing all kinds of varying degrees of expertise and execution on that front as well. And the ones we've participated in have really run the gambit. Some have been super, super effective, arguably more effective than an in-person event. Some have been just an absolute bomb, where it's like they really did not have it together and know what they're doing. So I don't think there's a quick or easy answer as far as what is the most effective. What it really boils down to is, are they, do they know what's most effective within their channel or their event and their audience, and have a coherent game plan as far as prioritizing and driving people to core pieces of that. And of that, tech is also a big piece of it. For ones that have had virtual expo centers and stuff like that, I've seen some of those be really effective. I've seen some of those not be effective at all. And the effectiveness of that is both a function of the tech and processes they're employing, as well as how well did they promote and prioritize it and stuff like that. So I wish I had a quick and easy answer for you, but like I said, the people putting on the virtual events are largely making this up as they go as well, with the exception of ones that have specialized in virtual events prior to. So as with virtual events is the same thing as in-person events. Make sure you really vet them. At this point, at least you have, for most of them, a year under their belt of where they've at least tried a few of these things. So you can go and look at what did they do, what was performance, what was lead gen. Another huge one, and strongly encourage people to do this: get some references of people that sponsored, so that you can go talk to them and see how did that actually perform. David, anything you guys had out of your conversations around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. A few things. One is, I think that at the very beginning, some of the clients that were using virtual events found them more effective at the beginning. And then I think maybe there's so many came online, it became a little bit harder to really have enough people at the events. And that's where we saw more people, turning to us versus some of those virtual events, because it started off good and went away. I think the other part is that with the trade shows, you for the really well run ones, you're going to get a lot more people sometimes, but the networking, the one-on-one networking is a lot harder to do. And so as a salesperson, you've got to be a little bit more proactive, which if you do it right, can actually be an advantage, right? So instead of having to work a room, if you see somebody who's attending the same trade show as you, and you reach out to them proactively, and then try to network with them there, you might be able to cut through clutter, but it's a little bit harder than just walking around a trade show and bumping into people.
All right, cool. Fabiana is asking, when it comes to virtual events, 2020, most of the events were for free or lower investment. Did you get any insight about people interested in conferences with investment? Or did you get any insight of people would be more open to participate in virtual events because they became more affordable? In comparison, what was the previous pandemia? Yeah, I mean, what my experience has been with it, and I think this cuts to some of the broad strokes things that we've said, is because of the lower cost, both as far as, what it costs to attend the event, register for the event, as well as the lower cost as far as, travel, lost productivity, stuff like that. It does open these events up to a lot more people. It's where, as a sponsor of the event, you tend to get a lot more bang for your buck as far as a cost per lead standpoint. The flip side of that, though, is because there's such minimal cost involved, there's not sort of that self-qualification that occurs. So, for me at one of my previous companies, we had the only app we sold was an app that integrated Salesforce with the inbox. So we wanted to sell to every decision maker at a company that used Salesforce as a CRM internally. Dreamforce, of course, every year out in San Francisco was the single biggest place to go get in front of those people. So we spent a ton of money at Dreamforce every year because everybody that got sent to that event, I mean, by the time you look at lost productivity, the cost of a ticket, which is about $2,000, what travel, hotel, all of that stuff, you're looking at, close to a $10,000 investment per employee somebody would send out there. So that did a lot of our qualification for us. If you were important enough for your company to send you to Dreamforce, you were important enough for us to talk to. And so I think that's a lot of what goes into it. You're going to get more people out of it, but they're not necessarily going to be as pre-qualified going through it. And so then you're going to, the onus is on you to do that qualification and that research on them following up. David, did you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the only other part is that, it's sort of the investment of time. So if you look at some of the virtual events and think about, you don't have to travel to it. You don't have to do all these things. So if you do some of the pre-research a little bit before an event and spend some of the time that you wouldn't have to be on a plane, and spend some of your time afterwards, right? So that's you can reinvest that time into trying to make some of these events more effective for you by reaching out to some of these people proactively who are at the event that you want to speak to.
Yep. All right, Tony is asking, in 2009, after the economic crash, it took several years before trade shows were back in force. How long do you think it will take this time? David, I think you're probably going to have more insight into this one than I will, but just anecdotally, what I would expect is, I think you've got two factors going on right now. You have the health factor as far as trying to keep everybody safe and dealing with with COVID. Specifically, obviously over the course of this year, the expectation is with vaccinations rolling out and stuff like that, that the health side of it will largely over the course of this year hopefully get brought under control, so that going into next year, that's not a primary driver of this. And then the secondary is what is going to be the longer term economic impact of this, and that's the one I don't think anybody has a good answer to. How much of this damage will have become deep-seated lasting damage that's going to take us a long time to shake off like it did in 2009, or how much of this is pent-up demand that's just going to come roaring back as we get the health side of it sort of taken out of the equation. And so that it's that second piece that's really going to determine, I think, how long the hangover is from this. It's one I don't think really any of us have a great answer to at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would add is, I mean, I think, we're not going to see trade shows really coming back like we saw in the data until Q3, Q4 at the earliest, right? And then as far as them coming back in full force, and I expect, what you're meaning there, getting back to where they were in 2019, there's two pieces of data that I think are interesting that speak to, how we can maybe look at this. One is, I would rather attend an in-person trade show than a virtual event. And 73% said they would rather attend a trade show than in person than a virtual event. So that's a good sign for the trade show industry. But however, when we asked virtual events are better than in-person trade shows for generating business, it was basically split, like 50-50, right? So I think there is a demand that people want to go see people. They want to go have fun at trade shows. They want to go see the people that they usually network with. But if the numbers really are that virtual events are as good at generating leads than trade show, than going and flying somebody out there and spending all that money, I just can't, I don't see it coming back the way that, as a percentage of total money spent on lead gen and pipeline spent, ever getting back to the 2019 levels, just because of what we've learned how to generate leads in other ways, that it is a very costly way of doing it. I, of course, don't think trade shows are going away, and I think they will be reimagined, probably a hybrid of virtual and in person. I just don't think after this disruption, especially if other folks are finding that type of fact, that you can justify the same percentage of budget to trade shows in going into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of corollaries between that and like work from home versus going into the office. You're not going to put the genie fully back in the bottle. I mean, you're going to have some people that are going to go back into the office. You're going to have some companies that put more of an emphasis on getting everybody back into a single location. You're going to have others that are gonna say like, hey, we're just never going to go back. And then I think most are going to be somewhere in that middle range. We're going to have more flexibility around it. We're going to have the option to do one or the other. We're going to have flexibility to be able to do one some of the time, the other some of the time as well. So I think the impact will be lasting, sort of no matter how, whenever you take the economic and the health and safety pieces out of the equation, I do think that there's going to be long-term impacts in just how we do this strategically. Cool. We got one more. Virtual trade shows offer different ways to be sponsors because of their digital nature. Are there any new sponsorship opportunities that now work better in the digital environment? I think the answer to this, I'm gonna punt on this one a little bit and say it really varies. It varies based on the event. It really varies on what your goals are for the event. So if your goal is just pure lead gen, then oftentimes what you see with virtual events is lower tiers still give you access to a significant portion, if not all of that registration list. And so if all you're doing is just trying to get leads out of it that you're going to then follow up with and put through your marketing engine or hand to your SDRs and stuff like that, then you may have an opportunity to save money and do those lower tier ones. If one of your primary goals with a trade show, whether it's virtual or in person, is building brand awareness, getting visibility, stuff like that, then you're probably going to want to focus on things that are going to put your brand and your logo up all over the place and all the stuff they're promoting, give you opportunities to do like virtual roundtables, do presentations, stuff like that, where it's going to give you more visibility around that. So again, it's a bit of a punt on your question, but I do think it really depends on the type of event and what in particular what your goals are going into that event.
Yeah, we didn't get any data around that. I think people are going to get creative. I think that people are using just these little wine hours where they're shipping wine out to people or dinners and things like that, and they might do that in a trade show environment. So it'll be interesting. That's the other thing. I think if we've got through at least 3 more quarters of this, I think we're going to see a lot of creativity. Right? There's been a lot of learning already. I think coming out of 2021, the trade shows are going to be reimagined. Which is also exciting. If you come up with some new ideas, there's ways to break through the clutter. Just because this is all new for people, and there's got to be still better ways of doing this.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Like I said, we will have an email out tomorrow. I'll have a link to the recap page. It will have both the recording as well as the deck on it. You also have obviously our contact information here on the last slide of the deck. And then last up, you can reply to that email if you have any questions for myself or David. Want to dig into any more of these details. And yeah, I think that'll be it. David, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fascinating looking at what all you guys gathered out of the survey. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jason.